Congratulations, Mayor, on your reelection.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Good evening and welcome to the City of Helena Administrative Meeting, November 4th, 2021, 6 p.m. Welcome and thank you for participating in the City of Helena City Commission work session. We are pleased to be able to provide this alternative meeting format in the city's effort to broaden public participation. Please be patient as we may experience technical difficulties during the meeting. We welcome your public commentary. Please read the following tips and guidelines for the app usage and your participation. This meeting is called to order. Madam Clerk, would you take the roll, please?
City Attorney Eric Cope.
Here.
City Manager Hala Shok.
Here.
Commissioner Halliday.
Here.
Commissioner Dean.
Here.
Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Here.
Mayor Collins.
Here. Thank you. Are there any comments, discussion from the commission? If not, we'll move along. ARPA special work session. Madam Manager Hollishock.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. First, just want to acknowledge, I know that June 10th is November 10th is the official certification date when the ballot is certified. I just wanted to say congratulations, though, Mayor Collins, on the other night, and thank you all for being here tonight. I know Commissioner O'Loughlin and Commissioner Halliday, these are very important conversations, and they're I know ones that you all want to be a part of, and I appreciate all of your time and patience as we waited for the water and sewer projects to get through the process, but also I know that neither Commissioner O'Loughlin or Halliday ran again, and I will say I appreciate every minute of time that I've had with you all. They've been very important conversations, and I appreciate it. So getting into the next piece of this is the awesome ARPA dollars and the work that the team has been putting into providing you with not only some ideas on potential spending and relationship to the activities and issues within the Helena community, but also with what can be spent in those dollars. Earlier this week, you received some detail on weeks past, the Balancing Act, which was a link to some dollars. It wasn't intended for you to come prepared with anything. It was just to get your thoughts and get you to start thinking about the kinds of things that the team had been discussing for spending opportunities. And then also a ton of information has come out in advance around what has been done, what the U.S. Treasury has decided. I won't spend a lot of time belaboring what you've gotten in advance. I'll turn it then now over to Director Danielson. Director Danielson is going to walk us through what ARPA covers and go into greater detail on what we have brought forward to you all as well. So certainly if you have questions, I'm sure Director Danielson will open up as you have them, and get out of the way. On to Director Danielson.
Thank you, Manager Harlow-Schock. Good evening, Mayor and City Commissioners. I'm going to share my screen and just show a quick PowerPoint. Hopefully it'll work this time. I'm going to check this and see if I can make it go. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes.
Thank you. So I just wanted to kind of recover what ARPA funding can be used. These are the local government funds that were distributed to the City of Helena, as well as other local governments and tribes across the nation. So some of the eligible uses here are split between, there are 4 categories. One is it can be, and are you seeing my next screen? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the first category is for revenue replacement. We sent out a calculation on how we came up with the $700,000. It's we rounded down to 700,000, but the calculation is based on a GFOA model and also the interim final rule to be able to calculate those funds. And I'll go into that a little bit in more detail in a minute, but revenue replacement is for the provision of government services to the extent that there was a reduction in revenue due to the COVID-19 pandemic. They're relative to revenues, the calculation is relative to revenues collected by the city in the most recent fiscal year prior to the COVID pandemic starting. The second category is the COVID-19 expenditures, or the ARPA fund expenditures can be used for COVID-19 expenditures or the negative economic impacts of COVID-19, including, assistance to small businesses, households, hard-hit industries, and for economic recovery. ARPA dollars can be used for premium pay for essential workers. And finally, ARPA dollars can be used for investments in critical infrastructure, water, sewer, and broadband. So just to cover the different categories, the first one is the revenue replacement. And you received, prior to this meeting, the city's tool that we use to calculate our revenue losses. That tool was provided by the Government Finance Officers Association to all nationwide and fiscal municipalities to calculate that. There are other models out there, but I have found that that's been the most widely used model used for local governments to calculate their revenue losses. The calculation itself does not break down individual divisions of a local municipality. It actually looks at a citywide analysis of revenue loss, which is kind of interesting because local governments operate on fund bases. And so the fact that the calculator or the legislation was citywide was a little interesting. It uses general revenues in the calculation, and general revenues are defined by the U.S. Census Bureau's annual survey for government finances, and they're typically revenues that are generated by the government, its own sources from economic activity. The most recent pre-pandemic fiscal year is what's used as the base year for the calculation. That base year for the City of Helena ended on 6/30/2019, fiscal 2019. Then the base year is increased by an average growth rate that's calculated by either 4.1% or our calculated growth rate, whatever is higher between fiscal years 2016 and 2019. The result of that is a counterfactual revenue that's derived at, and it's compared to an actual calendar year revenue for 2020 to arrive at the revenue deduction. So that's a little bit interesting also because we operate on a fiscal year from June to or from July to June, but we calculated all of our base revenue and our average growth on fiscal year, but then we're required to compare it to a calendar year of 2020. That's because of the legislation wanted consistency in comparison across all municipalities, local governments, tribes, and so that's the model that they use to calculate it. And then, of course, the revenue loss then is this estimated counterfactual revenue less our actual revenue, and we came up with $738,000. For the purposes of these exercises, we rounded down to $700,000. The COVID-19 mitigation and prevention uses include costs to help spread the spread of the coronavirus. That included, everything from hand sanitizers to PPE equipment, personal protective equipment, putting up shields in work areas to, such as the ones that were set up in the commission. It can be used for enforcement of public health orders, communication efforts for public health, and healthcare expenses for vulnerable populations. That section, that category of use also includes capital investment in public healthcare facilities and other public facilities, behavioral healthcare, and to address the disparity in public health outcomes. A lot of the studies that they did is that folks from socioeconomic statuses that of a certain socioeconomic status were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and its pandemic and all the economic ramifications of that. And so these ARPA dollars are helped to restore some of that economic recovery to those in those socioeconomic status populations, those vulnerable populations. And that gets to, responding to the negative economic impact on households, small businesses, nonprofits, those populations with disproportionate disparities due to their socioeconomic status, aid to industries that were disproportionately impacted, restaurants, tourism, hospitality industries, assistance to addressing educational disparities, early learning, child care, et cetera, and to build stronger communities through investments in housing and neighborhoods for people to have a safe and healthy place to live, and to improve economic relief programs. The next category that ARPA funds can be spent on is premium pay for essential workers. And the parameters for this is you can calculate up to $13 more per hour than what an employee is making. They can receive up to $25,000 in this calculation, or up to 150% of the state or county average annual wage, which we received that information from HR, which is $72,435 a year. The intent of the premium pay for essential workers is to address the disparity between the wage gap, pay rates, and the inherent risks taken by essential workers during the pandemic. Especially healthcare workers. You look at those that work in the healthcare industry that were required to be around the patients that had COVID, and a lot of those healthcare workers, such as CNAs and technicians, are not very highly compensated compared to the risk that they had to take to their health to assist with the medical care that those patients needed. And so when we just looked at the living wage here in Helena, it's about $17 to $18 an hour. That comes to about $37,000 a year. Employees at or below this threshold could be eligible for an additional $13 an hour of up to $25,000. You'll note that in the recommendations that we provided to the commission, we did not recommend using ARPA dollars for premium pay for essential workers, but it certainly could be considered if that's the direction that the commission would like to go. There's a lot of onerous calculations that have to happen for that. We didn't want to go down that road if it wasn't the commission's desires to use ARPA dollars for premium pay. Finally, the investment in critical infrastructure, and that's for projects to provide access to clean drinking water, improve our wastewater and stormwater infrastructure, and provide access to high quality broadband. It includes projects that are required to maintain minimum levels of health standards. And it includes projects that would receive funding from the EPA, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So projects that were eligible or are eligible to receive those types of funds are projects that are eligible to receive ARPA as well. And that is all I have for my presentation, but I am certainly open to questions if anybody has any questions in regards to the eligibility of ARPA funds and how they can be spent.
Thank you, Director Danielson. And we will move on to Commissioner O'Loughlin. You have the floor.
Thanks, Mayor. I just have two quick questions for Director Danielson. First, on the revenue replacement, so you showed that there were two different options of what the state could use for, or what the city could use for a revenue growth. did you all use the 4.1%, or what did you use for the revenue growth calculation?
5%. So it was it was either or, and it was the whichever's higher. And so when we took our calculations for our fiscal years and the revenue with the eligible revenue, the average of that growth was 5%. So that's what we used to calculate.
Okay, thanks. And then on the pay for essential workers, just one quick clarification. Does this, my understanding is that the state, at least there were some discussions about providing sort of hazard pay or pay for essential workers, focused primarily on health workers. So not necessarily state employees, but looking at sort of the health sector. Are local governments also given that flexibility, or are what you're talking about is providing a pay for essential city employees who are classified as essential?
Yes.
Or could we look at other industries within the Helena area as essential workers?
We could potentially explore that option.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments or questions from the commission? Manager Hollishock.
Thank you, Mayor.
You can
This
continue.
morning- this morning I had shared out the next thought process that I want to walk you all through, and that was the operationally and what we've seen happening in the community with regard to responding specifically to COVID and community issues that have arisen from those actions, and as well also want to talk about the water and wastewater projects and how that overall process went on behalf of the City of Helena and how it plays into this spending. So tonight the team had sent in advance to you some ideas. I know there are plenty of the team members on tonight who are available to talk in more detail around the ideas that are brought forward and put in front of you. As any idea is just that, an idea. So the next steps on implementation would be hearing whether or not you support it, also whether or not you would support it going out to further research, as well as the use of our engagement and education program as we've designed, and then getting public input and then implementation overall. So those key points I'm hoping to get a good feel for out of this, and moving out and into implementation of spending. So please, and I'll share my screen. Also, please know that these are only ideas and they are not the only ideas. And of course, we will add, and I will add anything else that you would like to see. So this is the balancing act calculator. We have used it before. And that calculator helps identify on the one side the revenue, and on the other side spending. And the intention is to show when you've spent money more than you have available. There are two parts to the distribution of dollars. The first is that they were tranched, is commonly the word used, and that is distributed in separate pools of dollars. So we've received at Helena the first half of the $8.4 million. The other half will come next year. So right now the city has available to it that first half of that first of the 8.4 million currently. This calculation in this overall balancing act tool covers both tranches, both allocations. So the ideas on the right side for spending take into consideration spending down all of the 8.4 million. Now, the commission could choose to only focus in on what is currently in hand and then address the second half when those dollars come in, or it can look at the whole and adopt and move forward with particular efforts of greater importance. So it's really an opportunity for you to decide as an as a group and as a commission how you would like to do that. So that's the first consideration. Do you want to spend all of it, or do you want to spend just the half on the first review here? And then the second is, what kinds of things do you want to spend it on? So we normally, when we talk with you all, we talk on the space around your priorities and the spending around of dollars around your community priorities. That isn't the case necessarily in this space, only because we've just finished the budget and we have really those community priorities, those strategic outcomes were placed in the budget in particular to focus in on what the commission wanted to achieve. So those dollars within the budget will achieve what we hoped will achieve your strategic outcomes. Now this conversation, knowing that, this conversation we really felt needed to be on things that either we could not fund or of course, and obviously they were of course in relationship to COVID, or that were one-time large expenses that we could never really move forward quickly. So that first large dollar amount is in water and sewer. And water and sewer projects in Helena are the basis for any of our development largely, and also any of the activities that we do currently. So these dollars, though, we have to be very careful, cannot be used for future development. So any water or sewer project that we are looking to fund are for things that are of the current system. So we're not expanding to improve services unless there is a tie in another way to another specific activity allowed within the ARPA dollars. So in the case of water and sewer projects, and I'll turn it over to Ryan here in a moment, our director of Public Works, and ask him to share more around just really the basics of the water and sewer. But ultimately, this isn't money that is around for a number of years. This is money around for a short period of time, large dollars, moving something forward. It's also really difficult to gain all of the materials and people necessary to do these larger projects over time. So with the director, Director Leland, and I'll let him talk about first what was funded, how already, so total amount, what was funded already, and then what's the balance of actual capacity in that window of time that we could actually do. Okay, so that I'll ask him to talk about. Director Danielson talked about revenue losses and how that calculation was arrived at. These are the activities the team brought forward as
Thank you.
You bet, as activities that could be funded within the 700,000. So these are revenue losses. These could cover the golf course and so forth. So I'll let Director Danielson go further into those. So we'll start first with Ryan and Sheila. Then we'll go to general government. I'll also ask Sheila to cover that. Then public safety. On the line, I have shared that we shared that Eric is here on behalf of the City Attorney's Office. Some of these programs he may not be able to speak to. I do believe he has knowledge of and will be able to provide more detail on overall. So Eric, don't feel too much pressure, but know that no matter what we're doing here, we have to do further implementation analysis for you all so you know what next steps will come. Okay. Same with the community behavioral health and homelessness. So behavioral health oftentimes is interchanged with mental health. So to clarify, these are the priority issues that have been going on in the community where we do not have dollars assigned, and yet we could use one time to do some key work. So the Cahoots pilot program, I'm going to ask Chief Hagan to step in and just briefly share what Cahoots is as a pilot and what we would bring to you by way of implementation next, what it would look like, and we'll review for you all before we actually move. Same with the DUI court. I do believe that Judge Peterson has joined us tonight. I also am aware that she is, and had this as part of her campaign for running. So a lot of the community may already know more about this than I did because she was elected before I got here. Then you have all been in conversations with Good Samaritan and the United Way. These dollars set aside would be for those kinds of projects that we've been discussing. And as you know, they also on Monday shared they want to provide even further detail. So again, these aren't final dollars. These are the ideas that have been brought forward in the places that seem to be the highest need within the community at this time, which are outside of your strategic priorities for the budget because they are not either funds that we have available or things that we would normally fund. So before I move into questions with that structure, knowing that Ryan will be our first lead-in and then Sheila, then any questions before we get started so that the team can be prepared or I can answer.
Yeah,
Sure.
Mayor, can I ask just a quick question?
Please go ahead.
So I probably should have asked this during Director Danielson's slides, but so my understanding is that the local government can calculate what its revenue losses are based off of this formula, and they have up to that amount to spend a little more flexibly, right? It's sort of like a broader definition of government services. So we have 700,000 that can be classified more flexibly as government services. And my sense is that we've got a fair amount of flexibility there. If above and beyond that 700,000, anything in excess of that has to fit within the other three uses of the relief funds. So what I think might be helpful, I mean, it's pretty obvious for water and sewer. I'm imagining that this is, you're classifying this as an eligible water and sewer project, but for the others, maybe also detailing out how those are fitting within the provisions of the Treasury guidance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds great. We'll make sure when Sheila jumps in after water and sewer, she identifies how the Gulf Centennial Trail, how those large items that were brought forward were identified and then how they tie. But as you said, they're very flexible. The same with the staff for administration, public safety, and then community behavioral health. So she'll introduce it with the tie. Correct? Is that how you're hoping we would do? She introduces it with the tie to how we viewed them meeting ARPA. Is that an accurate restatement, Commissioner O'Loughlin?
Yeah, because I think that the ones under the 700,000 do not necessarily have to meet the eligible. I mean, it's the broader, I think, if I'm understanding the way that you all have structured this, you're sort of saying these we would sort of classify as government services. The others, just better understanding where they fit into the eligible use. So above the revenue losses, the other 2 or 3 categories above that are the ones that I think understanding how those are tied to an eligible use would be helpful.
Gotcha.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner O'Loughlin. Commissioner Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question for the presenters as they go along. Talking about spending one-time money, and a number of the areas are referred to as seemingly like they are establishing programs, which would seem to sort of bind future budgets to a program that doesn't currently exist. So I guess I'd like a little clarity on the use of one-time money to establish ongoing programs, or what seem to be ongoing programs. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Do we have any other comments before we move forward? Go ahead, Commissioner Halliday.
Thanks. So just a clarifying question on Commissioner O'Loughlin's questions. So with regard to the revenue loss, since the way I understood that we did the calculation, those respective numbers are not specifically tied to any individualized fund revenue loss. We're not saying that there was a $145,000 loss in the general fund attributable to Centennial Trails feasibility study. We're just taking, what we're saying is a discretionary pool of $700,000, and these are recommendations to spend that 700. And we could accept all of them, none of them. We could pick an entirely different one unnamed project, right, for 700,000 and spend that money. Am I understanding that correctly, the way I'm stating it?
Mayor, this is Director Danielson. If I may address Commissioner Halliday's question.
Please.
Yes, that is correct, Commissioner Halliday. The city has discretion on however it wants to spend the 700,000. You can spend it on any government service or project.
Perfect, thanks.
Do we have any other comments or questions? Please continue. Manager Hollishaw.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to just add this comment, and then I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Director Leland, who I believe is on as well. And Director Leland, if you could just visit with the commission around total burden that was submitted to the Department of Natural Resources, what has been funded through that individual grant, and then what's the actual capacity of what could be spent within this short window of time. And then Director Danielson, just before Orion gets started, can you answer one quick question just so we can put some timeframes on this again? The dollars have to be spent, dedicated, and totally out the door by. So what are the key dates for all of us?
Yes, thank you, City Manager Hollershop, Mayor and Commissioners. So the timeline of the costs need to occur between March 3rd of 2021 through December 31st, 2024. There's also additional stipulation where as long as the city has a financial obligation by the end of December 31st, 2024, the money can then be spent through December 31st, 2026. So, but that financial obligation has to be in place by the 12/31/2024.
Thank you.
So that would give us through five years. So to the question to keep in mind, if we're doing pilot programs, this gives us, if we were to dedicate it, just to give an example, if we were to dedicate money for a pilot program beginning in January of this year, we would have through December of 2026 to fully spend those dollars. Okay, so that's
correct.
22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 5 years. Got it. Okay. Leland, if you could just provide us that summary, that would be great.
All right, we'll see if this works. Thank you, Mayor and Commission. Just to go over it real fast, we did have the 3 pots of money. We have the competitive grant that city was awarded $2 million, and that had to do with the water. We submitted $26 million in water improvement projects, mainly the 10-mile watershed and 10-mile plant to take care of that. Then we have the wastewater submission, which was an airport gravity main. And then we had the combined water and sewer that was down there for the Our Redeemer's Church development. And water was ranked the highest and received the $2 million in grants. And then we have to do a $2 million grant for that. So that's
4 million out of the pot C money, just to call it that way. Then we have the direct allocation money, which is the $5.1 million that needs to go into the water, or we could submit some other ones, but it's the water that was approved. And that needs to be about a $2.1 million match with that. So you're going to come up with about $7.5 million in projects. And we're proposing to go for the match, the SRF funding. One with that is the next round that's coming around. The DNRC is saying that there will be a 50% loan forgiveness for any of the SRF loans that go along with ARPA. So it seems like very beneficial that we use SRF to be able to go forward to get the match in the pot. B and C money, we can use pot A money, which we are proposing to take the $1.8 million and to do more of the projects and put it into the crosstown connector, which was part of our water submission. And that is the lifeblood of the city of Helena for water. It goes across, and right now we can't shut it off in certain locations or not real effectively. So if there is a water main break, we could have substantial water loss. And then to be able to do anything to that main, we have to shut a lot of people off of water. So as a health and safety, that's our number 2 priority. And to be able to put this money in there and then some of the direct allocation money to be able to shore that up and secure that. So that's what we're proposing. And our capacity right now to be able to get any projects done is right at $13 million. And that's why we came up with the 1.8, is that gets us to the $13 million number. And our capacity, even hiring consultants and managing consultants, just with everything construction wise, that's what I believe is our maximum number that we can really do at this point, unless of course we do a water treatment plant, which we could spend hundreds of millions of dollars in. So we are going to focus on the water. Because that is our biggest liability that we have out there, and it's a huge financial burden that we just aren't keeping up with right now with our rates. And this is a great for one-time money to take care of the flume, the head gates, the filters, and the crosstown connector, and then also get more storage up in the Hale area so we can use some of the Orofino water to go up there, so it gives us a little more capacity and we can be more efficient in everything that we do. So with that, that's a brief overview, and if you have questions, I can go into detail.
Ryan, can I ask a clarifying question? How much total has the city received just for water and sewer projects outside of this ARPA dollar, these dollars? These dollars are totally different than the 2 you just described. So you have the competitive and the state allocation, this dollar amount that they actually gave us off the top of their own dollars in addition to that competitive. So what are those $2 again?
The grant for the direct allocation for the state money is roughly $5.1 million that needs a $2.1 million match. So combined, it's around the $7.5 million is what we need for the direct allocation. Then the competitive grant is $2 million for the grant and $2 million for the match. So that's where we're at. It comes to about $11.5 million, a little less than that. $11.2 million is what we calculate right now, and that's where the $1.8 million comes in to get us to the $13 million.
So again, so we have $5.5 million they awarded to us. They asked us to make a match of 2.1. They're giving us loan forgiveness. Is that what you had said?
Potentially. That's why I'm suggesting we use SRF funding. The new round of federal funding that's going through the Senate and legislature right now it's being proposed that there'll be a 50% forgiveness for the SRF. It is not signed yet, but it doesn't seem that anyone's going to take it out. So there's potential to get a 50% loan forgiveness on that match.
I'm sorry, but what's SRF? Because I'm sure I'm not alone
Oh,
in that
no.
acronym. So please speak for the whole body. Thank you.
My apologies, Mayor, is it's a state revolving fund. Is the federal government gives the state of Montana a set amount of money to be able to give to local water and sewer districts and municipalities to be able to do projects on a very low income or low interest rate over several years. So that is where major projects that we go get our funds and our debt for water and sewer and stormwater. So it's state revolving fund, then we pay it back and they keep providing more and more money for that. And then they give loan forgiveness on that. And that's how they do their grants for water and sewer.
Thank you.
So in all,
Commissioner,
thank you. Go ahead. Sorry.
Commissioner Halliday.
Thanks. So, Mr. Leland, with a 5-year date for expenditure of the funds, do you foresee that, for example, if we'll just say all the money was pulled out and everything was dedicated to water sewer, that, would we be able to spend that balance down, the full 8.4, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, right? Assuming that there's that much time to spend it.
Mayor, Commissioner Halliday, I would say it would be, we would make our best effort. I see our capacity being right at around the 13 million, just with the construction that's out there and staff. I would give it, if you gave all the money to water and sewer, I'd make it the best effort possible. I think it would be pushing what our capacity would be, but we would make our best effort.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from the commission? Go ahead, Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Thanks, Mayor. I guess I had a sort of similar, maybe just reword just to make sure that I'm clear. So when you say that you're at capacity at 13 million, you're saying you're at capacity at 13 million for the next 5 years?
Director Leland.
Mayor, Commissioner, not for the next 5 years. We will get this done. I think we can get it done in about 3 years. So I think there would be a little bit more, but this is just the best guess for being able to still get all our other projects that are out there, such as Rodney Street and this. So I would say this is about a 3-year project, give or take, depending on what comes up on the design.
Any other comments? If not, Manager Howlshaw, please continue.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. I will go back to the calculator quickly here. And Director Danielson, this next piece is on the revenue losses. So I know that the team members and myself, we came up with these ideas based on our current needs. These are those $700,000 that are the most flexible, and I identified the potential for. So the golf course, I'll let you go into that real quickly. The Centennial Trail feasibility study, the commission received a number of emails around wanting to do the Centennial Trail. We don't have a full study or a design, and this would get us at least down in that $145,000 down for a feasibility study. Is it possible, and at the end, potentially an actual design that would be more clear on what could be done. A facility asset management plan. The facility team would have the opportunity to implement an even broader facility management plan, although asset management planning method specifically to include all of our city facilities, not just those within the general fund right now that are managed under the facilities team. So it would broaden us and improve our ability to manage asset failures within larger systems like water and sewer. Open lands, fuel reduction, and wildland urban interface work is continuing, and just continuing the work that we already do. And again, looking at capacity, adding another $50,000 to reduce our fuel generating trees and vegetation around Helena. And then last, consulting for the streets assessment methodology. And this would be a firm to analyze the current streets assessment and ensure that it meets the expectations. And then if it does not, come up with ideas and options for the city moving forward.
Manager Holshock, you're breaking up.
My apologies. Did you hear about up to open lands?
I actually heard everything just fine.
Okay. Okay, so at consulting for the street assessment methodology is the last, and then Director Danielson, if you would like to talk about how the 325,000 was arrived at, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Manager Hollershock. So, looking at the golf course fund, they were one of the hard hit industries impacted by the pandemic. Not only the restaurant, but also the golf course operations having to shut down. And as we know, when we went through the budget cycle, the fund was in need of general fund dollars to support the debt service so they could have a positive fund balance. I looked further into the operations for both the golf course operations and the restaurant, and did a little bit of analysis with the director of Parks and Recreation, and we all know that as well that the fund balance or the reserve balance in the golf fund is below its budgeted policy direction, and so the calculation for the 325,000 was an amount that addressed some of the revenue losses in the golf fund. Just in the concessions area in fiscal 21, I calculated and this does not include any support from the general fund at all. This is just straight golf concessions with their debt service. If we factored in their debt service, would have actually lost $335,000 in fiscal 21. The prior year in fiscal 20, without any support from the general fund, we calculated that the concessions lost about $260,000. And in fiscal 19, we calculated that the concessions operations lost about $170,000. When looking at the golf operations side, they're fairly sustainable. However, not enough capacity for capital replacements, utility cart replacements, mowers replacements, irrigation, maintenance. And so that 325,000 is being requested to restore the economic stability of the golf course fund in order to put toward maintenance and capital improvement and long-term fiscal stability of the fund. And so that's how that number arrived. And I believe we also have Director Panozzo on the line if you have any further questions on the golf course fund operations and the losses that fund has sustained.
Thank you, Director Danielson. Commissioner Dean.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wonder if you can talk a little bit about how much of that, for this year at least, has been contributed by lack of staffing. I know just from folks that I see that frequently golf, a lot of them want to be using the concessions, but because of staffing, like all restaurants right now, it's had to be closed for a lot of the summer at least. And so I'm wondering how much of that is contributing, and is this kind of, I guess, infusion of money to bring stability to the fund, will we be able to retain staff then for this next year? And, if they're going to be doing the simulators again this winter, et cetera.
Director Panozzo is probably, Mayor and Commission, probably, she and I have been in conversations about the wintertime activities. So Christy, if you could share more around this last summer and the revenue losses and the projections that you've been talking over, as well, the reality of what COVID by way of illness, and then also by way of just staffing, what that impact has looked like.
Thank you, City Manager Holler-Schilk. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great, thank you. So I can talk a little bit. I don't have specific figures associated with revenue loss due to lack of staffing, but we did have significant challenges fully staffing, appropriately staffing, and being open and being able to generate revenue, particularly this last season. It's difficult to know if that is going to continue or if this is sort of a short-term challenge to specifically the food service industry. But yes, we have had significant revenue challenges because of staffing. Does that answer all of your questions, or were there more in there?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it'd be helpful for me to get an idea. I mean, especially if we're talking about long-term impacts here, you know, how much of this is contributed from lack of staffing. I mean, I know there's lots of restaurants in town that have become very close to closing because they just don't have enough staff to produce any revenue. And so, you know, do we need to be I mean, is this a you know, wages issue that we can try to address, or are we just going to be in the same position next summer?
What makes us different?
Mayor, Commissioner, I don't believe we are different as far as we are experiencing the same challenges that other food service industry folks in the area and across the nation are. We have looked at and have raised some of our wages, particularly our cook wages. And that is something that we're going to be looking at as we develop our budget for fiscal year 23, is to the extent we can increase our wages so that we are competitive and are able to retain staff.
So if we were to infuse, I'm sorry, Commissioner O'Loughlin, if we were to infuse this kind of money into the system, what would be different?
This just, Director Danielson, I believe, doesn't this just balance out the revenue loss?
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. Yeah, I just, when we brought this forward, this is really a look back of what has happened to the golf course fund. They are currently not at their, not at their target in the budget season by about $240,000. That's just to bring them stable, to get them back to where they have a target reserve balance. We have not had the opportunity to look at, July through present day yet. We're still trying to close out our books, and due to staffing shortages in finance, we're behind. I would very much like to have that analysis for you, and as soon as I can get that, I will definitely present that to the city manager so she can share that with the commission. But the $325,000 is what's happened to date, before the new fiscal year. I don't know that it will be able to change anything going forward, except for to bring some fiscal stability, allow them to, their ongoing repair and maintenance and capital costs that they need going into this budget year.
Commissioner O'Loughlin?
Thank you, Mayor. I get a couple questions. So your question about what is different just sort of spurred maybe a thought from, or just a question. So I hear Commissioner Dean talking about the golf course, but then I hear you all talking about a restaurant. And I'm just wondering how much of this is tied to a restaurant owned and operated by the city versus the operations of a municipal golf course. Just roughly, what percentage?
Mayor, if I may address Commissioner Laughlin's question.
Please, please.
When I took the review of both the concessions and the golf operations separately, the lion's share of the losses are the restaurant.
Okay. And then just so because my question also was just how this 325,000 is going to be used, just sort of the procedural. So you all would deposit 325,000 into this fund and no changes would be made in the golf fund. No operation changes, no additional expenses based off of what we budgeted in this fiscal year.
I'm going to defer to Director Panozzo on that question. Thank you.
So that's a good question. I also think Sheila, just before Christy hops in, Christy's staffing reduction and the burden on the 325. So the $325,000 is to cover the revenue as anticipated. The actual reduced burden, because there is lower staffing or lower charges by the golf course restaurant, is there a deduction similar as well? Is there a reduction in the amount charged? So covering revenue is different than actual expenses. So I just want to make sure that we're making sure that we're not saying, oh, we were just putting the money in there just to cover the revenue. But we're also talking about on the expense side, we had this much of an expense.
Yeah, but City Manager, what I'm asking is, what is different in expected expenditures above and beyond what we budgeted, right? We just talked about water sewer. That's a project above and beyond expenditure that we would intend to do that is not reflected in our budget. Are there expenditures expected or planned for the golf course that are not reflected in our budget? Or is this just filling a revenue gap hole?
Right, so it's I'll let Christy talk about that. I think because it's an enterprise, that it's ensuring the safety of not only the operation this year, but also its reserve. So, but I'll stop. Christy.
Yes, thank you, City Manager and Commissioner O'Laughlin. It is the latter. It is filling revenue losses, and some of it to meet our target, our reserve target that we are not currently meeting in that fund. So because of our significant revenue losses, we are not, in some ways, we are not meeting that reserve target that we have.
Mayor, I have a question about one of the others, if that's okay.
Please.
So I kind of have a similar question about the open lands, fuel reduction, wildland urban interface. I think the city manager mentioned, or maybe it was Director Danielson, about adding capacity, but could you talk a little bit about what that 50,000 would be used for? And I'm not sure if that's for Director Panozzo or.
Sorry, I was trying to comment. Yeah, Director Panozzo, if you could hop in, that'd be great.
Yes. So that 50,000 would be specifically for fuels reduction, specifically on Mount Ascension. We do significant amount of fuels reduction. We have significant amount of fuels reduction in our budget for open lands, and we get significant amount of funding through grants for our fuels reduction. But this would be for additional fuels reduction, not in our budget, and not slated for grant receipt.
Great, thank you.
Mayor, along the same lines for Director Panozzo, with regards to fuels reduction, It's not in the budget for an expenditure, I take it. Do we lack the $50,000 in the budget to be expended in the reserves above the reserve minimum?
I don't know if we specifically lack that, but it is additional fuels reduction that we could do with this $50,000, if that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, all I'm trying to get at is this a situation where the 50,000 is needed from these funds, or does it just need, say, a budget amendment or whatever is necessary to up that fund's expenditure by 50,000 because the money's there, and can be budgeted for, say, in the next, or accounted for in the next budget cycle? Right, this is an enterprise fund. It can raise its rates just minimally to cover that 50 if it needed it. That's why I'm asking. Do we need to spend these free discretionary dollars, or can you just do a budget tweak to get the same result?
Mayor, may I address Commissioner Halliday's
Go ahead, please.
Comment about it being an enterprise fund? If I'm not mistaken, Director Ponoza, this is Fund 235, and that's not an enterprise fund, it's a special revenue fund. And it does receive its money through rates, though. The revenue could be increased by increasing the assessment to that fund.
And I apologize when I used special revenue versus enterprise, but what I mean is that one can be increased. It has an assessment on properties. And if the dollars exist today where it's not putting the fund in jeopardy, for example, like we don't think it's going to run below zero or go to a dangerously low rate, the dollars would likely replenish next year. It can be adjusted on the rate. And that's all I'm asking is this a dire necessity for this fund today to put this 50,000 in? As we're just looking at opportunities to spend this 50,000 in different ways. I'm not saying it's not a good project. Just tell us to amend the budget or fix it. And it sounds like that would be a great idea. It's just a question of, is this the best use for this $50,000?
Mayor, if I may address Commissioner Halliday's question. So in looking at the fund, this particular fund is meeting its reserve targets. It does have excess reserves. However, I am not, Director Ponoza could probably address the uses of that reserve or earmarks for that reserve better than I can. But currently that particular fund is meeting its reserve target and has excess reserves.
How much is the excess reserve, Sheila?
Thank you. For the fiscal 22 budget, the excess reserve is projected at $116,000. That would be able to be used for operations or capital improvements.
Thank you. So I'll get to you shortly, Commissioner Dean. I just want to understand some, going back to the golf course. So what happened next year? Are we going to be, will we have to infuse another 350 in there?
Mayor and commissioners, I'll step in here and say that I have no idea the course of COVID or the course of materials or the course of those who may choose to return to the market of running a restaurant and being part of managing and waiting tables and so forth. Those are all factors that are not predictable. So that's the first. The second is that it is a restaurant, and yeah, we're still in the phases of transitioning what is a snack shack construction into a restaurant. So for next year.
But the 350 is not only going to the restaurant manager, correct?
As Director Danielson shared, the greatest burden of the 350 is in relationship, 325, excuse me, is in relationship to the restaurant.
What is considered the greatest burden?
How much in total?
Yes.
The difference between what is the loss by revenue of restaurant as well as by operations. Go ahead.
I'm talking about dollars.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about dollars.
Correct. Yes, I got it.
So what is the greater burden? How much in terms of dollars?
Director Danielson.
Thank you, City Manager Hollershock. Can I have the ability to share my screen so I can kind of demonstrate my calculations? Thank you.
Yes. One of the other parts while she's putting this up, Mayor, is that cost center accounting is not something that we've done as an organization. So cost center accounting in relationship to budgets and management of an operation is something that we're implementing this year.
I don't know why it's not coming up. Sorry. I, for whatever reason, can't bring up that particular screen, but I'll just verbally tell you. So I had the opportunity to do a cursory overview and splitting out the golf operations versus the golf concessions. If I looked at the golf operations and then I did not include any funding from the general fund to cover debt service, in fiscal 2019, the concessions lost $170,000. In fiscal 20, the concessions part of the house lost $260,000. In fiscal 21, they lost $335,000. And in fiscal 22, they're slated to, just based on their budget, and I don't have any updated figures to date, but just the budget alone had this concessions losing money at $170,000. So the burden on the fund is the concessions. The golf operations itself also needs to increase its rates if it wants to have long-term, stability of the fund and be able to cover maintenance and operations as well.
Can I just real quick, Mayor, on that point, does that include the debt service, or is the debt service separate from those numbers?
Thank you, Commissioner Laughlin. That includes if that fund had to pay its own debt service. Now, and I just wanted to do it for demonstration purposes. If this fund, this enterprise fund that's supposed to be self-sufficient, paid its own debt service, that was the calculated losses on the fund. But as you know, we did inject general fund money, in the last couple of years to cover some of those losses.
Thank you, Director Danielson. Commissioner Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was, and I'm not sure if the city manager was going to go through some of these, but it sounded like folks were asking different questions on that revenue loss piece. I'm curious about this Centennial Trail feasibility study. I know that, we had a lot of information that was provided to us in the multimodal study that included a bunch of information with completing parts of Centennial Trail. So this is something that the community's been working on for well over a decade. So I'm just wondering, what does that include? And because I'm thinking of, there's lots of parts of the trail that I think that we could do work on right now, and anyone could tell you what you need. So I'm wondering what this actually would include and what information do we lack right now, given that we do have a whole bunch of work that's been done over the last decade.
Sure. So as I understand it, that work doesn't actually talk about the interconnection or the actual implementation on those areas that the city does not own. So feasibility is actually implementation. It's not the planning of it. So it's the phasing of the implementation. So that's first. And then the second is in those areas that we have the design, part of the, as you know, Centennial Trail goes right into the railroad right of way. And that is a pretty tough crowd to get through. And, as Commissioner Halliday has shared, that information has been turned in and been sitting on a desk in the railroad for a while. So these are improvements to address what is the vision that people have been describing of the Centennial Trail, but I don't have a phased approach plan for implementation or feasibility as to how we're actually going to manage this in the future. So that's the feasibility study outcome. So as far as who's going to do what and how much that costs, I think the 88 Trail is the really good example of having lots of ideas on how things can go and what actually happens when some of the physical hindrances in the way, like areas that we don't own, when those things are actually described and shared accurately and into a feasibility study, then we can at least plan for implementation. So that's what I'm saying, we just don't have.
Commissioner Halliday?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So on the Centennial Trail question, I'm curious about the source of the 145. I know we have a pretty outdated prior Centennial Trail master plan from before even I was on this commission. There were discussions, Mr. Leland or Mr. Konopke would know, probably back in the like 2017 or 18 range, where Friends of Centennial Trail, who were instrumental in getting Centennial Trail moved forward, still had about $30,000 in the bank. And there was even an attempt to get a consultant to do an update. And I think there was even a bid on the $30,000 RFP or something in that range. I don't know if the city was putting up any matching money. And the goal there was to look at those implementation questions really for that, the next piece of Centennial Trail, which is across Montana going east. And the portions that are on railroad right of way, which we have a historic easement to, which, I encourage this commission to keep banging on the doors of BNSF over the next few years, we're relatively settled. And it was really just a question of putting asphalt on the ground or determining if those were going to be built out. So I'm just curious about sort of that 145 and what the idea is, and just making sure that, we've talked about if that money is going to be spent on it, what exactly that 145 goes to make sure, one, we're not being redundant on portions, and two, that it's really focusing in on the major questions left at Centennial Trail, and also whether it includes any feasibility for Henderson Street Bridge.
So can I ask a clarifying question of you, Commissioner Halliday? The Henderson Street Bridge, that bridge is or is not part of, when I say the Centennial Trail, would you describe it as part of the bridge part of that?
So the concept of the bridge would be something that goes bridging the two parts of Centennial Trail as they try to cross Henderson. So it would be an integral piece of Centennial Trail if it was ever completed.
So yes, so that was the intention, was to begin moving and completing the Centennial Trail to include Henderson. So the whole of what you've described to be, including the bridge, yes. Then what's the distinction? What's the difference? The master plan, and I'm trying to pull it up here, so I'm sorry if someone in the team has a copy that they can pull up quicker than I can. If you could show what that plan actually looked like by way of phasing, that would be great. But as I recall, it does not have the actual implementation and final design elements in it. That's where I'm trying to push us to.
Commissioner, Mayor and Commissioners and City Manager, this is Director Konopke. I apologize. I'm having internet issues, so I'm only on audio. I think the intent of this master plan or revisioning is exactly part of what Commissioner Halliday was talking about, was to look at the section of Centennial Trail east of National, and providing and looking at those improvements as development and building has changed over in that 6th Ward area, but also the connection, those connections that are still dirt and not paved, which include from Centennial Park to Benton, and then the section of Benton to Henderson, and then Henderson to just before Joslin. Looking at improving those. I do have just got an update yesterday haven't been able to get it out to everyone, but we spoke with BNSF MRL. And apparently the person that does these land acquisitions left BNSF. And so we're in that holding pattern again, waiting on some answers, but we're keeping contact. It's just been difficult to get straight answers from them. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you. Madam Howell-Schuck, would you continue, please?
Sure. Any other questions on those items as far as the details? Under the, again, 700,000, I'll share my screen. That brings us to and then the consulting on the streets assessment. The general government, Director Danielson, the 125,000, I believe, is intended to help cover our team in hiring staff to manage just the administration of this as a city. Is that correct?
Thank you, City Manager Hawrylshock. Yes, the use of the ARPA funds across all categories is an eligible use for that is to hire a consultant or staff person to administer the reporting requirements and tracking requirements of the ARPA fund dollars.
Is it for the duration?
Thank you, Mayor. It would just be for, as needed. We estimated that at the, at $125,000, that would be, as needed to track, make sure that we're spending appropriately, and report effectively to the U.S. Department of Treasury on the use of ARPA funds.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that I hear we got about 5 years.
Yes.
So with all these one-time funding, we have 125,000. Is that for the duration of the 5 years?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We would only use a consultant as needed.
Okay.
Yeah, they would only charge us the hours that they put toward the project.
Gotcha. Comments or questions from the commission? Please continue there. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I was slow. Just one more question on that administration piece. I know a lot of municipalities are, really trying to measure the impact that this spending is having. And so I'm wondering, does that include us really, collecting good data on what kind of impact we're having with this kind of spending?
Thank you, Commissioner Dean. Yes, that could potentially be one of the tasks that this position would do. As an NEU, we're a smaller municipality. We're not required to report that, although we are required to report how we're spending it and who the recipients were and what they did with the funding. But as far as performance metrics, that's left to larger municipalities that have more resources to do that kind of reporting.
Okay. Please continue, Manager Hawrylshock.
Okay. Public safety. So we have under the public safety header 2 items from suggestions from the city attorney's office, and then also one from the police department, the Friendship Center, Victim Services, and I believe that there was also support from the Friendship Center as well for additional funding to this. So first, Director Danielson, if you could help explain the tie to spending of ARPA dollars in relation to these particular activities.
Thank you, Manager Hawrylshock. So the rest of these activities actually fall under the category of COVID-19 mitigation and prevention and responding to negative economic impacts. The Federal Register has a pretty long list of examples of expenditures that are eligible under these categories. Inclusive of that are support for the mitigation of the disease, providing services to help the mitigation of the spread of the disease in congregate facilities such as homeless facilities. Also inclusive is behavioral health care, mental health care treatment, substance abuse treatment, behavioral health services, addressing disparities in public health outcomes, meaning that, populations that belong to, disadvantaged socioeconomic status categories, funding things like healthcare, healthcare workers, public health navigators, housing services to support healthy living, remediation of lead-based paint exposure, evidence-based community violence intervention programs. That's just a few of the examples that are provided in the Federal Register that these particular expenses fall under the category of eligibility.
Go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
That was from before, I'm sorry.
Okay. Please continue. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Halliday.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Could you go into a little bit of the misdemeanor probation program, the specific ask for it, what it entails? I don't know that it's something that I'm aware of coming up before or talked about in the past, and it's a pretty significant ask.
Yeah, I will share over to Eric, who has, I believe, the notes is shared to us from, there he is, from TOS on the ask and exactly what those dollars would be used to for those 5 years.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Manager, Commissioners, and Mr. Mayor. So as you know, I guess as many of you know, misdemeanor defendants in the Helena Municipal Court are often sentenced to complete chemical dependency treatment, anger management, and a substance abuse education courses. We see many of those defendants revoked on their sentences because they either don't have the money to complete them, or they are not quite organized enough to get signed up for those programs and complete them once they're actually enrolled. The city attorney has proposed to put up some money to assist those defendants in completing those treatment programs and the counseling that they're required to do to prevent recidivism and hopefully get people the services they need to get out of the criminal justice system, and so we don't see them time and again. What the city attorney has proposed is that the city would pay for all or a substantial part of the treatment, and for a dedicated staff of 2 to 4 counselors and 4 to 5 probation officers to track defendants' compliance.
And what happens after 5 years?
I think that we would have to try and come up with some money to continue the program, because I think what we're going to see is that it's going to be pretty beneficial and we'll want to keep it going.
A question on that, as someone who watched many clients get revoked repeatedly for outsized charges on drug treatment programs. Actually, they didn't get sentenced to drug treatment. You got a drug conviction, you got sentenced to an alcohol treatment program. It was pretty pointless. But it's seeing people get into that spiral. I like the idea of us expending the money. I'm curious about the tracking piece of it. We already revoked these individuals. We already tracked their compliance. So I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit on the staff size build out for it, because Don't we already look to do this, and doesn't the court already revoke or hold individuals in contempt when they don't complete?
Yes, we do already revoke individuals, just as you noticed when you were working in the court, and it's pretty regularly. I think the idea would be to have somebody more closely engaged with these people to make sure that they are signing up where they need to sign up, walking them through the process. I think right now, a lot of times, it seems to me at least that defendants aren't very organized. They get the paperwork from the court and they have certain deadlines by which to complete these things. And then they lose the paperwork. They're not keeping track of their deadlines. And the first time they find out they're not in compliance with their sentences, they get a petition to revoke and, hey, you got to come to court, or they get arrested on a warrant. So I think if we have somebody, and I'm certainly not an expert in probation or anything like that, but I think if there's somebody that can more closely be engaged with them prior to those deadlines and keeping them on task, then they might be able to have a better success rate.
Is the idea behind it, current probation and parole on a felony level does charge supervision fees at times to individuals. Is the goal that these individuals who already have, at least back in my day, it was about $90 for a conviction, even if you didn't get a fine, that you had to pay off for your court fees. And one criticism of misdemeanor probation across the country has been repeated costs that are imposed on individuals. Are we seeing as passing the costs of the staff time, the program time, or in some way onto the supervised individuals?
I am unaware if that's part of the plan. I'm kind of the same opinion as you. A lot of these people don't necessarily have the money to pay the fines. They don't have the money to pay for the courses. So it's kind of tough to impose supervision fees on them at the same time, because I believe that might be setting them up for failure as well.
Commissioner O'Loughlin?
Yeah, I just had I'm less familiar with this even than Commissioner Halliday. So you mentioned, I think, a couple things: assisting defendants in completing certain programs, which I imagine is I guess I'm wondering, is that actually assisting in paying for certain programs? And then you also mentioned 2 to 4 counselors and then a couple probation officers. Do you have a sense this $1 million, how that's broken up? Are you all looking to hire new personnel for this? Is it covering costs of existing personnel? And then how much of it do you estimate would go toward, support financially, covering the costs for chemical dependency, substance abuse, other programs that defendants are required to complete?
So with regard to your second question, I believe that these would probably be new positions. I am not, I don't know of anybody that we could assign this task to right now. I will get you an answer for sure on, whether we imagine these to be new positions or if it's new duties for existing folks. And then what was your first question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think, assuming that these are new positions, I would imagine that's a fair amount of that 1 million. But just kind of getting a sense of, do you all have sort of a budget for what this program would look like, and how much of it is going toward additional personnel capacity versus direct assistance to defendants?
I do not have that breakdown for you. I can tell you, and you did ask this as well, I think part of the program, yes, would be to help them also pay for the courses that they need to complete.
Also, just to add, remember, all of these are not a complete agreement. If you are in support of them, these would be the ask of the staff to come back with these further kinds of details for you if in fact you want us to move forward in this direction.
But we can't move forward if we don't understand what's going on.
Right, but the total dollars and the ask of each burdened line item, we're not asking to make that full. We need to get you that level of detail.
Commissioner Logan?
Thank you, Mr. Merrick. So the financial impact on the defendant, is that based and what this program would assist with, is that based on an ability or inability to pay on the part of the defendant? Or does this care of all defendants?
No, I believe it would be on an ability to pay basis.
Thank you.
Commissioner Dean?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I would be very supportive of a program like this and really looking forward to seeing more details. I know I would see a lot of the impacts of families getting involved in the criminal justice system on the kids' side in my classroom. And one of the things that I'm wondering if we could get included in some of this additional information is what kind of partnerships these caseworkers, probation officers could provide in terms of connecting folks with organizations that do help develop some of these life skills of that, are so much of the reason why, the cycle just continues. And so with that, who can we partner with to make sure that the whole family is really kind of moving out of these cycles?
Thank you. Would you continue, please, Madam Manager Hollishaw? Or
Great.
attorney courts?
So that will move us into the community and behavioral health and homelessness section, unless you have any other further questions in the public safety area. Okay. This section, again, behavioral and mental health and homelessness. These are the areas that we do not have staff and services currently focused in. I'll first start with the DUI court. I will let you know that I do not see Judge Peterson on, but I don't believe that she has to be here in order for me to share what the $125,000 was to do. And that was to actually line out the implementation of the DUI court. So while the ability for her to identify the need by way of her piece of adjudication, there's a second part, which is the police court, and then city attorney's office also build out. So we cannot add services without also understanding what that addition means. So this would be in support of Judge Peterson's need and interest in having a DUI court, finding out how much what we would need to do to implement as an organization. So that's what that $125,000 is, to hire a consultant to help us finish what we need to have in place to fully implement that across the departments, outside of just what the judge would do for adjudication, as well to write the application and the grant application for the judge. Then the remaining, the homeless emergency shelter, the Good Sam's case management, these are the two pieces. We've put these hold numbers in here based on what we've been hearing. Recently, as you know, on Monday night, we heard from Teresa as well as from United Way. And then last, the Cahoots and homeless program. So I'll stop for a moment if I could have Chief Hagan jump in here if I could. Talk a little bit more about the pilot program potential within the Cahoots area, and then also anywhere under the homelessness as well. Sharon, our Director Haugen, any additional information. We've already on Monday night heard the update from our partners on these one-time costs. But you've not heard much around the cahoots, so I'll go ahead and stop talking. Chief Fagan.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. I'll just do a real brief discussion because this will be one more thing I will be bringing forward at a future commission meeting in probably within the next month. We did have a mental health working group to look for a new model in Helena to respond to mental health in our community. And Cahoots is just a name that is a program out of Eugene, Oregon. Wouldn't necessarily be the name of our program. However, this will be similar, a program similar to this will be what I will be proposing to the commission based on the recommendations from the mental health working group that we had formed through the police reform discussion. And I was tasked with, from that group, I was tasked to bring forward to the commission recommendations on what our our program should look like. So the $500,000 is a placeholder. We're not really sure exactly what it will cost, but it is a program that we're looking at to have caseworkers and mental health professionals more involved with the police and in working with those suffering from mental illness. And I'm here for any questions.
So this is another program that will have that will need employees long term. Am I correct?
You are correct, Mayor.
So that means we need that's a roving. That means we'll be spending money for employees as long as the program is on.
Correct, and this is to see to develop a program that works best for our community. I think long term this was going to be a discussion, regardless of ARPA funds or not, was a mental health program in our community that better serves those with mental illness. So I think this gives us the advantage of working with a pilot program to figure out what works best with our community with ARPA funds.
Thank you. Commissioner Dean.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm wondering, Chief, if maybe when this recommendation does come forward, if you can maybe explain how this is similar or different to the current crisis response team, and or you know, is it supplementing? That kind of information will be helpful.
Do you want that now, or would you like that at a later time?
I would defer to the mayor, but I'm always open.
Do you have the answer?
I actually do, Mayor.
Yeah, please go ahead then.
So right now, the mobile crisis response team just responds to people that are in crisis. What this would do is, this is a program to get folks help before they get to that crisis state. In what my proposal is going to be is to work with mobile crisis response team to expand that program rather than have a third response to people in mental health crisis, not have police, CRT, and then this Cahoots program. It would be working with MCRT to expand their program, which we've already started working with them to do. I've already addressed this with them a little bit, and they're open to the idea to discuss expanding the program. Since it's operated through St. Pete's, it would need to be a much bigger discussion, but that's my thought process. I'm not sure if that answered your question or not.
Does, and I really like that coordinated approach, because I think that was my biggest concern is I think people frequently don't know where to go to or what their options are when it's a million different programs and called all different things. So I really like this kind of consolidated, coordinated approach.
That's the goal.
Thank you, Chief. Any other comments or questions? Please continue.
And that brings us to the end of the ideas portion of this conversation. I'll open it up and just circle back around if you have any other questions on the items brought in. After this, we will move into those interests that you would like for us to go ahead and bring forward to the community for input. And of course, any other ideas that they would like to, the community would like to bring forward through the engagement program that we have. set aside through the IAP2 process. And then also further detail, and we will begin to work on that further detail for final decision making for implementation. Sorry, go. Thank you. Do we have other questions?
Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Thanks. Sorry, I didn't realize we were done. I thought we were just doing cahoots. I do have a few questions on the community behavioral health category.
Go ahead.
So I'm looking at the packet of information that we received, and for the homeless emergency shelter, the column for request was 8 million. City manager's recommendation is the 3.2 million. Could you talk a little bit about where that 8 million request is coming from and sort of what all is included in that 8 million?
Sure, absolutely. Mayor, if I may, sorry. The 8 million was the first placeholder. We had no idea what was available at the time. We're getting closer to understanding what kinds of stock we would have by way of a shelter. So the idea initially was that we would be making one-time investments with our partners in leadership and management into the future, one-time cost. So this temporary shelter for the winter, this temporary setup for the winter this year, was the 300,000. So this was the initial number. We, as you heard the other day, Teresa from Good Samaritans is no longer in support of the homeless pilot if in fact they can narrow in on they've identified a motel recently that there's potential for far less investment by way of one time on the purchase and the need for this temporary, but there will be there will be improvements that will need to be made within the motel itself in order to begin to use it as a shelter. So these numbers are based on what we have been hearing over time. So there's much similar to what you've heard from all of the other projects. This one has the most difficulty, and thankfully Teresa was looking to get more narrowed in on this shelter gap for us, and as well her need for case management, as they did make the commitment to managing the shelter into the future.
Okay, that's helpful. And so the HOTS, is that still on the table? This is something different, or what's that 300,000?
I think it's off.
She said it's off. I would support whatever she was bringing forward by way of partnership. She just had that on Monday. I sent this spending diagram was sent out 2 weeks ago, the balancing act was sent out 2 weeks ago on Monday. She's continuing to look for a permanent shelter. Based on what she says, there's not a need right away for that HOTS location or the investment in that temporary HOTS if she can secure what she's got today.
Okay, and then on the case management, is this envisioning 250,000 for a 5-year period? Do we have a sense of sort of what all would be factored into that expenditure?
No, but we can get you that. I know these are the placeholders, but yes, that further detail, much like the other pilot programs, what those would line out as. Okay.
And then Mayor, I have one more question, or would you like me to pause and let Commissioner Logan go?
Oh, go ahead, finish off.
Okay, I guess just a sort of bigger picture question about how you, city manager, have been thinking about prioritizing this topic. You know, we had some conversation about, and I think that, you know, in one of the meetings that I think the city helped to host or convene of housing officials, you know, there was a fair amount of conversation around the YWCA's proposed project out at the Our Redeemer. Now, I recognize that the state determined that the water sewer expenditure doesn't fall within that eligible use. But I think you and I talked about, can a case be made potentially that that is a COVID related expenditure, not a water and sewer project, but a one-time infrastructure expenditure classified as, you know, and I can't remember what the terms in Director Danielson's, but sort of COVID mitigation and focused on populations that have disproportionately been impacted by COVID.
Yes, I picked this bucket of 1.8 million as the one, I believe Ryan or Director Leland, if you are still there, I believe you were looking at this 1.8 because it was specifically the one project that was submitted to DNR that was not awarded, that this was the project you were anticipating to address as part of this. Is that correct?
Mayor, Commissioner, City Manager, yes, that is one of the options that was going to be with that $1.8 million is to be able to do that.
Right, but City Manager, I'm not talking about the water and sewer eligible category. What I'm talking about is, did you all discuss or think about the Our Redeemer project in the context of, you know, one of the other eligible categories? I mean, I think that was on this list as 7 million. It's not, you are not proposing to put any money towards the Our Redeemer project.
So the water and sewer bucket is not intended to be, each of these categories is not intended to be a specific spending category. It is the volume of work within the activity itself. The only one that is that specific tie is the revenue loss. So in the case of water and sewer, that additional 1.8 capacity is the dollars that would be set aside for My Redeemers. Those are, so just to be more clear, this isn't around the eligibility so much as the activity. That's what this water and sewer projects means. Yes, it's eligible under water and sewer, but that's not what we would be using. We would be using, just as you described, this additional tie to supporting those because of the additional layer that My Redeemers is actually supporting those in low to moderate income or low income impacted as a result of COVID. That would be a connection. Otherwise, we would not be able to spend money on that My Redeemers. That is within this 1.8.
Our Redeemers is part of that 1.8?
Correct.
Director Leland, is that, so that I'm just looking at the packet material and I don't see any money allocated for, but can you tell me where on the sheet in our packet that's included?
Mayor, Commissioner, I unfortunately don't have that packet. I'm in Salt Lake right now, so I don't have the packet sitting in front of me, so I apologize, but I will get a hold of it and let you know.
I'm gonna pull it up here on the screen in a minute.
Director Hagen, do you have something to add to that each topic?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Commissioner O'Loughlin, Commissioners. Well, I don't have, I think some of the Our Redeemer Lutheran Church expenses were inherent in that original 8 million. But one of the things that have been talked about, or should I say, a new twist to this is that the Cooperative Health Center, not the Cooperative Health Center, the Public Health Center, Lewis and Clark County Health Center, is interested in moving out to the Our Redeemers project. And with that, they can bring some money from the county with regard to COVID related. So I don't know if that entirely, I know that doesn't entirely answer your question, Commissioner O'Loughlin, but that also brings some additional funds available. I think the initial capital stack is going to need for the purchase and the installation of water and sewer. But,
I hope we're not counting our chicks before they're hatched, because that's nothing for sure.
well, we had a meeting with Drinda.
Yeah, you can have lots of meeting. It's still not for sure until it's there.
And well, one of the things is that the Lutheran Church itself has to agree to it as a partner. So we'll know. They're meeting this month. I don't remember the date to identify if that. And then she has some money that she will bring to help purchase that. So that was the attractive part of having the health department kind of move out there. Plus, she indicated that a lot of the clients that would be living out in that project are those clients that she serves.
Thank you. Manager Hollishaw, do you have it, or you should be able to give it to her?
I believe it's in that. So this is the sheet. You should see it on the screen. Do you see a water and sewer infrastructure projects? Okay, hold on. It's sharing. Okay. Do you see it, water and sewer?
Yep.
About 800,000. Now, Director Leland, I'm trying to pull up my project total for the My Redeemers.
Mayor, Commissioner, City Manager, the total one for our Redeemers, when it first went in with the first look at it, when we did the competitive grant, you were looking at right around $3 million is what we were proposing, and 1.5 of that was going to be some match, and it comes down to right below the sewer lining, and then the purchase of the land and all necessary extensions. That's 7 million. What we're looking at is we may not have to do all the upgrades, and the $1.8 million was going to go a long ways to be able to satisfy what was needed for the water and sewer extensions for that development. So we felt fairly comfortable that the 1.8 million may not be the total that is going to be required, but it would be a very good start to go forward with that.
So is that the crosstown connector valve replacement? Show me where in blue is what we're funding for Our Redeemer.
Right, hold on. I'm trying to, here it is. Ineligible. So we submitted $1.5 million ask to the request to the state of Montana for that project. So 1.5 million would be the ask, and I don't see it in here on here, but it might be because of what we called it. Here we called it the My Redeemers, but I don't even see it on this list. Sorry, Ryan.
Mayor, Commissioners, if I get in, if you look at the very bottom, that it's not a specific one. You see purchase of ORLC land in installment of necessary extension, and then goes there. That's $7 million. It wasn't broken out into the $1.8 million. It was kind of combined in there for the ask. So that's where one of the 1.8 million would come into.
Right. And I mean, the way that I read this, the city's ARPA funds, 1.5 million is going to the crosstown connector valve, and 800, there's like another partial city ARPA funds, and then there's the Park Well project is ARPA funds. I don't see our Redeemer being funded with, and I understand that we
Yes, I gotcha.
cannot classify
I
it
see
as
that
a
as well.
water and sewer
I see that as well.
project. But I'm just wondering, is it somewhere in the homelessness housing section? That 3.2 million, are you thinking about using a portion of that for our Redeemers, or did you all decide not to include our Redeemers?
I think what I based on what I'm recalling, it looks like it was not included under the water and sewer, but as we know, thankfully, this emergency shelter is around $1 million that we've been talking about. So that would make available 1.5, but that was not intended. So I think that was an error, that it was just left out. But if the actual cost works out, we may have unintentionally set aside enough money anyway.
What did you just say, Manager Hollishaw?
So the homeless shelter, as described on Monday to us by Teresa,
Ortega.
Yes, by Teresa Ortega, is around $1 million. That purchase is far less than the $8 million that we had originally heard, and then also the 3.2. So we added that one. This 3.2 number was well before we'd ever heard from Teresa about this property. So if in fact the property were to be funded, we would have unintentionally actually covered ourselves anyway under that homeless emergency shelter to pull out $1.5 million for my Redeemers if we actually didn't need it all.
Commissioner Logan?
Maybe a comment before I get to my question. It says on the spreadsheet that Rachel has shared with us, purchase ORLC land and install necessary extension. I'm assuming that ORLC is our Redeemer's Lutheran Church.
Well, it doesn't say anything. I think that's what Commissioner O'Loughlin is saying. It's just in a big sum, so you don't know what is allocated for ORLC.
All right. So my question that I had previously was the 3.2 million for the homeless shelter. That's just for the facility, the building itself. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Thank you.
And sorry. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Commissioner Dean.
Okay, well, I was just gonna say, we are, from what I understood on Tuesday, Teresa and they're putting together kind of an updated plan, because the motel that they're looking at now, it sounds like it would be about $800,000 and then upgrades, and we don't know what the cost of that would be yet. So really that 3.2 or 5 is a placeholder, not necessarily what they are proposing, because they're coming back to us with a refined budget of what's actually necessary. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
So it could be we could afford it or we couldn't afford it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I think we maybe could.
Yeah.
It depends on what the renovations would cost.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Understand.
Right. So we have an obligation to come back to you all with the implementation plan and more structure within every ask in here. We just want to make sure that we put the time that's necessary in building out something like even these pilot projects. We put in real numbers and make sure we come back to you with what that burden looks like.
Commissioner O'Loughlin?
Yeah, I think Commissioner Dean, that's absolutely right. Like including a placeholder in here, just recognizing that housing insecurity continues to be a growing issue. I would feel comfortable allocating, a sizable portion of this, knowing that it will be an allowable use, just based off of the disparate impact of COVID on this population. I do think that sort of similar to, the conversations that we had around the CARES home funding, I do think it will be helpful for us to really get a full sense of what are all the proposals out there, and then what are the ultimate goals that we want to achieve with the sort of the set aside funding for this purpose. I really felt for Teresa, because I think that was like a lot of sort of new information that she was given like less than 24 hours before that meeting. I think I have a lot of questions about the extent to which, if that project makes sense, if it really fits within what the city wants to invest in, is it the right location? Obviously a lot of questions around what the ultimate cost is. So I like the idea of setting aside, knowing that this isn't not necessarily designated for a specific project, but like more information is needed on a variety of projects that might be out there.
Thank you. At this time, we'll take a 10-minute break and we will be back after that. This meeting is called to order. I know you had your hand up, Commissioner Dean.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a couple, I guess, final thoughts and feedback. As we start moving forward, I'm not sure what exactly the city manager was intending in terms of next steps, but a couple things that I just want to make sure I note. I do think that it might be, I think it's worth considering what we can include in here, what to develop a system that helps us provide better and more streamlined services to citizens. I know we lack really integrated data systems, and I know that the finance system they're implementing, I think will help. But we also don't have integrated systems that really interface with the community. And so I think if we can use some of these funds to find a better way to integrate and streamline some of these systems, so we're not sending citizens in a million different directions on our website and our app and everywhere else, that might be something worth considering with these funds. The other thing I wanted to note, in here, we really didn't have anything included for economic development or additional support to workers and local business. I know that, and I'm hoping maybe that we can, in another work session and more information, hear from maybe MBAC and the chamber, or some other local groups in terms of what some of the needs are. I know just from my involvement still in the hospitality and restaurant industry, our local businesses are still really struggling. I know the same goes for retail. Panda Express is offering $66,000 a year for a general manager with benefits, and that's just not something that our local restaurants can compete with. And so I think that, really finding out how we might be able to help would be good. I also think that there could be opportunity in terms of workforce training and pipeline development. I just had a conversation the other day with a city commissioner in Kentucky who they're using some of their funds to develop internship, apprentice, and workforce training pilot. One, to stop their brain drain, and then two, train up some of their young people who aren't necessarily getting the skills they need to make a good wage. And then also helping meet some of their construction needs that obviously are coming with all of the development that lots of places like Helena are seeing. The last two pieces that I just wanted to note was that I really would like to see from staff, I think, a deeper evaluation of the impact and effectiveness of each of the proposed programs. I really want to learn more about some of these, like including the consolidated victim services. I think that, we have a lot of really great ideas here, but I want to know what the return on investment will be, not just in monetary returns, but really on quality of life for folks in our community. So we can make decisions that give us the biggest bang for our buck. And then the final piece, I know that the city manager had mentioned this before, is figuring out kind of what our public engagement strategy is. I know that I would like to see opportunities for the public to have, I think, more like focused conversation, not just listening to our meetings, but maybe more listening sessions or focus groups with some of the stakeholders that would be most directly impacted or could be. I think that getting that kind of feedback would be really helpful to make sure that we're directing funds where they're going to have the most impact. And I don't necessarily always think that just, our public comment period at the end of a meeting is sufficient to kind of have that rich dialogue. So those are just some of my final thoughts as we're wrapping up, and really appreciate all the information that was provided tonight. And I'm excited to see what kind of impact these funds have on our community.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any final comments from, no, from any other commissioners? Commissioner Logan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll take a crack at it. I guess generally, as I look at the various areas that we could spend this money on, the ones that make the most sense to me, and I think Commissioner Dean brought up one that I think's worth looking at. That's not necessarily included in this particular packet, but are the water and wastewater infrastructure investments, as well as those that deal with the revenue losses. Many of the other areas, in my view, are sort of really taking one-time money and establishing new programs. And I'm having a hard time with that, and using this one-time money that will down the road bind us to programs that are up and running, and now we've got to go to the public and say we need this money for these programs, and we're not thoughtfully planning that. Not to say that staff's recommendations are not thoughtful, but we've had no real public engagement up to this point on a new and, well, not a new and significant directions that we're considering taking city government. And so I guess those are my general sort of overarching thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have any other comments, final comments from the commission? Manager? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm guessing that at this point, the city's going to move forward with some sort of public outreach and further discussions on this. I don't know that we're gonna weigh in on this again before I'm out of here, but I'll say that a number of well, there's a lot of good projects in here and a lot of good ideas. It concerns me that they're going in about 20 different directions. And if you're not careful, you're going to do about 20 different things skin deep. And it would behoove this commission to determine sort of the really specific directions it wants to go. I think Commissioner O'Loughlin was driving at some ideas that, if housing, which we have seen as an extreme crisis, right, across the spectrum in Helena over the last 2 years, and really before, is a focus, then, you don't have to pick a project today, right? But give direction to your manager, give direction to your community development department to collaborate and to really come back with some comprehensive projects, the costs, the ideas, and grab every dollar you can. Don't send another $325,000 to the golf course right now when you've got housing crises on the street. That looks like letting them eat cake. Really figure out each dollar you can grab here and comprehensively look at it. You want to do a CAHOOTS program, figure out what those dollars really look like, and create those comprehensive programs. Figure out what it looks like for those programs to be sustainable when the 5 years is up, that are going to show people, right, how you move costs away from wasteful use of the police department when they can be doing the real needs of their jobs and not dealing with behavioral and mental health crises in our city. But you need to actually come up with that direction rather than saying, let's talk about 20 different projects and see what the public says and spreading yourselves widely.
Is Commissioner Halliday frozen?
I think so.
Okay, Commissioner Halliday, you're frozen. And so do we have any other commissioner wanting to say a few words? Okay, I will move on to public comments. Madam Clerk, do we have anybody from the public who wishes to address this commission? Is Commissioner Halliday still on?
Mr. Mayor, looking for Commissioner Halliday at this time.
I think he got off. He was frozen.
Yes, we may have lost him.
Okay, so we'll turn it over to the public.
At this time, Mr. Mayor, I have no hands raised. I've also received no written public comment on any items this evening in the Q&A.
Okay, we'll wait a little bit, give them another minute or so. Any change, Madam Clerk?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Any final comments from the commission? Nothing? Oh, go ahead, Commissioner O'Loughlin.
Yeah, Mayor, I guess I'm not too sure sort of what direction the city manager needs at this point. I guess I would just sort of say I'm very supportive of moving forward with scoping kind of a pot of money to address homelessness, which I think has been just I feel at least we're getting a fair amount of community feedback on that topic. Correct. Without having to do listening sessions. And I think it's our job to sort of be responsive when we have these types of investments to say, okay, this is something that is bubbling up, that is a growing need. I also think, given the conversations around access to mental health, I'm excited to hear more from Chief Hagan about what this model could potentially look like in partnership with others in the community. I also, Commissioner Logan, I think you were gone during the meeting where I sort of posed the same question about, what of these proposals are one time and what would be considered sort of ongoing expenditures. My inclination is to steer this money toward one-time projects. So if we are talking about, partnership with another entity in the acquisition of property, hard sort of infrastructure costs that are possible. I will also only be here for 2 months, but I think that would be wise. And I think that for instances where you have something that may be ongoing, what I had asked for was for staff to articulate if this program were to continue into the out years, how would it be funded? Are there other grant dollars out there that the city could potentially apply for, or would the commission want to consider building this into its base budget? So that would be my direction. I think the housing, I think we need more information. I think we need to make sure that all stakeholders are part of the conversation. But that feels like, for me, the priority. And then also really digging a little bit into the potential cahoots model, given, again, what we've been hearing from the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I don't think I could have said it better. We heard from the community this past summer in terms of homelessness. I mean, we heard it every day. And if we've got some money that have not been budgeted, and that pot of money can definitely help with the shelter Good Samaritan is looking at, because we have to. It's a must that we address that problem. The problem is not going away if we put our head in the sand. It's not going away. Next summer, we will be faced with it, and we will hear from the community again. What did we do? We had a whole year to do something about it, and what have we done? I'm in favor of looking at what Good Sam what Good Sam's manager was talking about Miss Ortega when she mentioned about the property, because it's needed. If we don't do it now, when? And if we do it later, with what? We have this now. I think we should be addressing that issue seriously. That's where I'm at. Any other comments? Manager Hollishaw?
So I had shared the screen of the IAP2 model. I just want to make sure that I'm hearing and providing a summary that would seem reasonable here. So focusing in on housing and homelessness, infrastructure improvements, and the potential of the CAHOOTS program building out these three, along with the probation services, and under the public safety tab as shared previously, looking into one, not only those actual hard costs are, but then additionally holding collaboration sessions within at least the, it sounds like perhaps, just to be more clear, Commissioner Dean, were you wanting to the point made by the mayor and Commissioner O'Loughlin, that with housing, do you agree that there's been enough information, or would you like to see?
Yeah, I guess I should have clarified my comments. Where I think we do need more discussion with stakeholders in the community is not on the housing piece, but on all of these other programs that, this is really the first night that they've ever come before us. I think I agree that, we've had 2 joint city county meetings, and then I think 2 commission meetings with Good Sam's and United Way. I know a lot of these discussions were even part of it when COVID first started with the COAD. So my concern is not with the housing piece. I'm very supportive of doing something. I really would like to see us, though, have a more collaborative discussion on some of these other programs, and also making sure that we have some information, not just for the commission, but for the community, on really what is the return on investment for some of these other proposed programs as well. And I think it's worth asking, are we missing other things? I pointed out the economic development piece, that I think that, we might consider, what are there other things that we can be doing there with these funds? But the housing piece is not where my concern is.
Great. Okay, I will pull together a summary for you all and begin. The team will, as Chief Hagan shared, he'll bring to you all the CAHOOTS who had already completed some more collaborative conversations, and then bring as far as what kinds of services, and then this idea of CAHOOTS more fleshed out. The same on the misdemeanor program as described by Eric, and then codes as well. The UI court. That's it. Thank you very much, Mayor.
And the one other thing was the consolidated victim services.
Yes, got it. On the economic development, I just want to, while Commissioner Dean, I didn't hear support for the others, I just wanted to make sure and share, we did make some significant investments on the, with MBAC to grant making through them, through the general fund savings, about $500,000 there. So I can ask for an update from him on how those dollars have been spent, and that might help as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other final comments? Okay. Madam Clerk, I just want to go back to public comments. Do we have any raised hands before we leave?
Mr. Mayor, Commissioners, I have no raised hands, and again, no written public comment.
Thank you. At this time, the meeting is adjourned.